Welcome everyone to TUT 1082, Managing Linux in the Cloud with SUSE Manager. My name is Don Vosberg. I'll be one of your presenters today. I'm a sales engineer with SUSE, based out of Indianapolis in the US.
And I'm Neil Bornstein. I'm your other presenter. I'm also a sales engineer based out of Atlanta. So you probably have some reason why you're interested in this session. You have a reason why you want to run SUSE Manager in the cloud already. We have some reasons why you might want to do that as well. For example, more and more workloads are already moving to the cloud, so it just kind of makes sense to have the management for those workloads in the cloud as well. In addition, just like on premises, you need to schedule updates and security patches for those cloud-based workloads. Security doesn't go away just because you're in the cloud. In fact, security exposures can sometimes be even higher in the cloud. Of course, that depends on how you set things up, but you want to make sure you're doing things like CVE scans and patching in the cloud just as much or even more than you do on premises. SUSE Manager can run in the cloud and manage cloud workloads, and it can manage on-premises workloads as well. It can cross between multiple cloud providers and on-premises deployment scenarios as well. But of course, when you do that, you need to remember that anytime you send network traffic between clouds or between into the cloud or out of the cloud, primarily out of the cloud, there may be charges that apply. So always make sure you're aware of what you're putting in the cloud.
And our demo today shows two clouds and on premises, so you'll have a chance to see it in person.
Absolutely. And then of course, when we talk about managing workloads in the cloud, we're not just talking about SLES. You can manage Red Hat, CentOS, Oracle Linux, and Ubuntu in the cloud. And in version 4.2, we'll be adding AWS Linux to that as well. So managing cloud workloads with one tool with SUSE Manager is a reality.
So, what can we deliver in SUSE Manager in the public cloud? All the great things that you may have used SUSE Manager for on premises also correlate over to the cloud. And in today, in the marketplace for Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform, you will find images available for you to install either the SUSE Manager server itself or SUSE Manager proxy in, per, in a predefined image. So you don't have to start from installation media. It already has been built, and those are kept current on all those different platforms in their image control processes that differ between clouds. And inside of the cloud, once you get it up and spinning, you'll have all the ability to manage all those different hypervisors and clouds. Um, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a cloud instance. The SUSE Manager construct is the same, whether it's whether it's a virtual machine or a physical machine in a cloud or in a different cloud, and that gives you the flexibility to have visibility across all the portfolio, all of your managed instances, and of course, even more things than we can show you in half an hour of this presentation.
So let's talk a little bit about what are the things that are the same across all the cloud providers. First of all, every cloud provider has a variety of tools to interact with your workloads, whether they call them VMs or instances or what have you. There's usually a web UI or portal. There's usually a command line API, and there's usually RESTful APIs as well. So it's very easy to spin up new workloads or instances in any of the cloud providers. And that goes for SUSE Manager itself as well. There are SUSE Manager instances in the various cloud providers' marketplaces. So even though you could theoretically just take a SLES instance and deploy everything you need to make it into a SUSE Manager instance, don't do that. Go and find the marketplace images. and start with that because we've done a lot of work to make it easier for you. Now, anytime you create a new image or a new instance in a cloud provider or in a VM environment, you need to make sure that that new machine is unique. That means you need to reset its machine ID. And there are a couple of easy command line commands that you can execute in order to do that. And those are documented in multiple places. You need to make sure that you understand the difference between bring your own subscription and on demand instances. SUSE Manager server itself is only provided as a bring your own subscription, and that goes for the proxy as well. Managed instances can be a combination. You can have bring your own as well as on demand. So understanding the difference between those subscription models is very important. In all cloud providers, when you start a new SUSE Manager server, you need to make sure you assign a static host name. There are numerous problems that you'll run into if you do not do that. So, and we'll talk more about that as we go further through this presentation.
You can end up with a host name that's 10 miles long.
Exactly. And there's internal host names and external host names. It's really important to pay very close attention in all the cloud providers.
And part of that is because that fully qualified domain name of the server gets embedded in a certificate, and that certificate gets propagated everywhere into a database and onto all the clients. So you want to make sure it's correct before you start.
Absolutely. You'll need to define storage for your server. Now, the reason we don't do that automatically or do any kind of guesswork around what you're going to need is because that will highly depend on your particular environment. How many different OS versions you're going to be mirroring, for example. We require a certain amount of storage for the mirrors, a certain amount of storage for the database, and it's all highly dependent on your particular environment. So you'll want to add a separate storage volume, and we provide a script, the SUMA storage script, in order to
really
configure that
simplifies
properly.
it compared to on-premise. It's much simpler in the cloud.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't have to actually attach any disks to things. It's all right there. It's all on demand as far as adding more storage. And then setting up SUSE Manager itself. The SUSE Manager setup script as part of YAST is the same as you would use on premises, and it does some checking for you in terms of making sure your host name is defined and things like that. So that's there. That's available in all the cloud providers as well. And then finally, when we look at a managed system, it's a managed system. No matter which cloud provider you're in, currently we look at them all as equal, whether it's a SLES system, a Red Hat system, an Ubuntu system, whether it's bring your own subscription, whether it's on demand, whether it's on premise, whether it's in the cloud, they're all just equal systems.
One thing that is unique about the cloud when you've set up SUSE Manager in it is that it has predefined the organization name as the word organization. So when you've set up your SUSE Manager server, probably want to customize that so the world isn't thinking that you're just organization. And that's organization with an S, so it's
Of course.
the British version of that. So on-demand managed instances can be managed with SUSE Manager. And when you do that, you're essentially redirecting it from the software sources that are in that particular cloud to point to the software sources on the SUSE Manager server. So on SLES instances, and that's what really this is referring to as SUSE Linux Enterprise instances that are on demand, there's just a couple of things for you to remove, and then you run the bootstrap script as normal to onboard that system with SUSE Manager. If you don't remove these things, it will keep adding those repositories, and your control over the content of your managed system will be compromised because it may see patches newer than what you have in your disciplined landscaped patching environment. All the specifics for that are here, in this linked page in the documentation on how to set up public cloud on-demand instances with SUSE Manager.
Now, here's a few things to watch out for if you are running SUSE Manager in the cloud. The first thing is instance sizing. I already talked about the storage that you'll need, but there are requirements in terms of how much RAM and CPU you give your SUSE Manager server. These are documented pretty well in the installation guides. But just make sure you pay close attention to that. In some cloud providers, you can resize an instance, so you can fix it if you didn't do it right in the first place. But you'll just want to make sure you do your homework and make sure you size it correctly. There's also storage required for Postgres database. The storage volume that the script deals with puts it all in a single volume for both your database and your repository mirror. You might find it useful to define those separately. If you do, then you might need to reinstall Postgres.
Right. Anytime you add storage and then try to run YAST SUSE Manager setup, if PostgreSQL was installed before then, it puts things in varlib pgsql, the Postgres package itself, and it might get lost looking for it. So just make sure that you do it sequentially. So adding the storage is something you want to do ahead of the install for Postgres.
Yep. And then there's the swap file partition on the cache disk. Don, can you talk about that one?
Yeah, so SUSE Manager, part of the YAS2 SUSE Manager setup will install a swap file just for the database purposes. And it uses a partition on slash or root, and it will create one that's 2 gig in size as a part of that YAST SUSE Manager setup. And in the cloud, because our root file system is not BTRFS in the cloud, it can create a file and it will add that in as part of the YAST SUSE Manager setup. So just be aware it's going to create one because of database requirements.
Great. The next one is about the host name and DNS. So we already talked about making sure your host name is defined. Here's a couple of commands that you should run, and don't assume you don't have to do all of this, right? You should do all of these on your host.
It's not super hard. It's only like 2 things, right?
It's only 2 things, but if you forget, you're going to mess things up. Now, it is, like I said earlier, the YAST SUSE Manager setup script will probably complain if you haven't done these things correctly, but it's just so much easier if you do it to start with. And I can't emphasize enough that entry in etc hosts, you need both the FQDN and the short host name to be there in that order. So just make sure you do that and you'll save yourself a lot of pain.
The script will complain if you don't have it done right, that your host name doesn't match what it thinks it sees on the system. And these 2 simple steps will solve that 100% of the time. And this actually works on premise as well. So.
Yep. Okay, and then because we are delivering SUSE Manager as a bring your own subscription image, you need to make sure you have the entitlement to register that SUSE Manager server, whether that's an evaluation key that you've gotten from download.suse.com or a subscription that you've purchased. Go ahead, and the first thing you're going to want to do is run that SUSE Connect command, SUSE Connect -R with your registration code, in order to make sure that that system is registered and has all the latest patches. And also, you should go ahead and run zipper up on that system as well. And then make sure that you...
I can speak to this one because in my demo, I have some SUSE Manager proxies in my differing clouds. They have to be able to SSH to the SUSE Manager server. So make sure that you open the port for that proxy setup, because it has to communicate with the SUSE Manager server as part of getting the certificate in place for it to pass on to its client connections. So that's an important thing for the SUSE Manager proxy to be able to SSH back to SUSE Manager. And that's only for the setup. You can turn it off after that if you're paranoid about security.
And the last thing is, after you run the SUSE Manager setup script, you'll have a SUSE Manager server up and running with a default admin user. That's your organizational admin account, but it will not have a password set. So you'll want to use the set password command to set the password before you can log in the first time.
If you read the documentation, it will tell you how to determine what that password is, but it's a much easier way for you to set it to be one that's memorable for you.
Absolutely.
So SUSE Manager uses a number of ports to communicate. In our example, the primary one, obviously, for the clients to communicate is there's two things. It uses SALT. So SALT has ports 4505 and 4506, and it uses 443 HTTPS in order to receive the content. Now, in the world of a proxy, your system only needs those ports open on the proxy server itself. The client system does not need any firewall changes. It's all outbound. Outbound to 443 on the proxy and outbound to 4505, 4506 on the proxy, and that's it. If your system is registered directly to SUSE Manager, he needs those all the way to the SUSE Manager server itself. SSH is only required if you are using Salt SSH and not the default Salt minion communications between your client and the server. So for the most part, if I'm using Salt, I don't need any ports open on the client. I got to get to 4505 and 4506 on either the proxy or the SUSE Manager server, depending on where I'm placed in process. Sorry for the spaghetti slide, but at least it's there for your reference.
So we've talked a little bit about bringing your own subscription versus on demand in terms of the managed servers, but it's important to note that the SUSE Manager server, SUSE Manager proxy server, and SUSE Manager monitoring components are available as bring your own subscription only. That means if you need to run a SUSE Manager server, you've got to buy it directly from SUSE or your choice of reseller. Now, the SUSE Manager lifecycle management component, that's the piece that actually gives you the entitlement to manage a given workload. That's also available as bring your own subscription, but if you're running SLES for SAP, lifecycle management is included at no extra charge in on-demand instances. So there's a couple of different
and that
ways
was a
to
new
get it.
offering that we included, that isn't it, Neil?
It is. It's very new in the last year or so. So the bottom line is, if you have SLES for SAP and you're purchasing it on demand or pay as you go, you get lifecycle management at no extra charge. Otherwise, you need to buy lifecycle management. Now, if you want to manage pay as you go or on demand instances from SUSE Manager, you need an account within SUSE Customer Center in order to get access to those update repositories. Talk with your sales rep about how this happens. As of today, you need an entitlement that you're not going to have to pay for, but it needs to be there so that we can make sure you have access to the repositories you need.
And that really only matters if the only kind of instance you have is on demand.
That's right.
If you
If you have a
already have
mixture,
BYOS, you don't have to ask
yeah,
for anything special. It'll just be there.
exactly. I think you're on mute, Don. You might want to start over.
For hybrid and multi-cloud, most people are in some way either moving from all on-premise to partly on-premise and partly in the cloud. So many of of our customers are in that situation where it's hybrid. And perhaps you have some workloads in Amazon and some in Microsoft Azure. You have some in Google Compute Platform or Alibaba or some other cloud provider. There are some things for you to consider if this is your situation. First of all, network traversal. As Neil mentioned earlier, into the cloud, they love you sending data in there, but pulling it out becomes expensive. So if I have my SUSE Manager server in Azure and I have a bunch of clients in AWS, what comes out of Azure is going to be an expensive thing for me to use over in AWS. If you are comfortable with that and you understand the costs, uh, just be aware that that potentially could happen.
And a proxy can help with that to some extent.
Definitely, proxies can help mitigate a lot of that. Um, Populating channels in SUSE Manager, as well as updating systems, all of that uses network traffic. Just be careful in how you align that, as well as network traversal across cloud regions. So, if, for example, you have a significant portion of your portfolio in North America and some in Asia, some in Europe, consider putting a SUSE Manager proxy in those other cloud regions to help mitigate the cost. And the best practice is, if you're starting with all your systems on premise, build your SUSE Manager server there and then use proxies in the cloud, because ingress things into those clouds is not something that they put on the ticker. So you can store as much as you want on your SUSE Manager server on premise and push it up through proxies, if that's where all of your systems are located. Clearly, a lot of this is dependent on where your stuff is, right? But in a hybrid and multi-cloud environment, this is our best practice. And in our demo, that's exactly how we have it aligned. So we're going to have a demo of SUSE Manager. Hello, this is the demo for managing Linux in the cloud with SUSE Manager. Today I have a group of systems. You can see there a lot of variety. I have some Ubuntu, some CentOS, some Oracle Linux, and a variety of different SUSE Linux Enterprise images. And not only do I have a variety of different systems, I have a variety of different locations. As we've mentioned, you can manage with SUSE Manager, which this one happens to be located on premises in a data center. I can manage systems in public cloud or public clouds, as is the case here. So I've created a system group, which is essentially a tag that allows me to see all the systems that are in AWS. So in this environment, I have a single proxy, and you can see the globe there indicates that this is a proxy server. This proxy is in fact front-ending the connection for all of my AWS instances, because they're located on the same network as this guy. And I don't care whether they're CentOS or Ubuntu or any variety of Linux. Their connection only needs to go through this SUSE Manager proxy in AWS. I also have a group of systems on Microsoft Azure. So I have all of these systems are running again through a simple proxy server. So in Azure, I've provisioned this proxy server to be quite modest. You can see in the overview here that I have one vCPU and only 2 gigabytes of RAM. I have a modest amount of disk, but it's enough to cache content and deliver what I need through to my clients. I have networking set up here on this guy to allow HTTP and HTTPS to my server. And this one is actually assigned a static public IP address and a DNS name, because I want to do more than just patching with it. I want to be able to do all the things that SUSE Manager knows how to do, including in-place migration. You'll notice that I have a system here that's running /15 SP2 for SAP applications, and it's using a fully vetted set of channels that I've built inside of SUSE Manager. But it started its life not long ago as a /12 SP4 system running on Azure, and I applied a profile to auto install and upgrade this system to /15 SP2. So I initiated that at 20:02 Mountain Time, and it finished in 31 minutes and came back and reactivated itself with SUSE Manager and applied all of the states that are associated with that activation key to come back and be a /15 SP2 VM, again running in Azure, and again all of this aimed and run through my proxy. So you can set up an auto installation profile like I did and give it all the directed repositories that correlate to where it's going to register at the end and include all kinds of scripting and everything you need to be able to successfully auto install. But what if I just want to do patches? Well, I've selected my Amazon systems here, so I can list all my systems and say, here's all my Amazon boxes. And even though there are a variety of different operating systems, I can do things in aggregate on these systems. So I can apply updates to packages on these systems in aggregate. And you can see some of these are Debian packages for Ubuntu, and some are SUSE Linux Enterprise patches. And I can schedule them together and apply them just like I would in any other environment. I can even create an action chain or schedule it to occur whenever I wish. And you can see the systems that it chose are going through Amazon. And again, they go through this modest proxy with important network settings that allow it to effectively manage my entire set of systems wherever they happen to be located, whatever operating system they are running. So SUSE Manager meets monitoring. SUSE Manager has now the ability for you to use Prometheus and Grafana, which are cloud-native applications with tremendous depth and breadth, be able to create both a server that does that and use exporters that can be pre-delivered by SUSE Manager to be able to capture important monitoring statistics about your systems. So we have pre-installed Prometheus exporters on the SUSE Manager server itself that looks at its hardware performance for memory and disk usage, all of the internals for SUSE Manager with a scheduler, and we have Prometheus exporters that are already available in the tools channel for all the clients as well. And this is regardless of what cloud environment you're running or even on premise. And the SUSE Manager proxy server that we've talked about putting in varying clouds can also be monitored with a Squid exporter. So this last year, SAP monitoring on SLES for SAP was delivered with some formulas for monitoring all the SAP elements. In addition, you can integrate it with the Azure Cloud Monitoring. So if you use monitoring in Azure, all the Prometheus exporters can be imported into that and made part of that whole dashboarding portfolio that you can design whatever dashboards that you wish. But in the cloud, SUSE Manager, you set up a single instance to be a monitoring server for both Prometheus and Grafana, or split it up however you wish. And then automatically you can import all the registered clients from SUSE Manager into that Prometheus environment, federate it with other Prometheus instances, a ton of depth there. But we just wanted to have you aware, especially of the new features where we're integrating now with both SAP monitoring and with Azure.
Now, when we talk about the cloud, of course, there's more than just running cloud instances or VMs. Every cloud also has a numerous set of container platforms. Uh, and here's just a list of all of them. SUSE Manager works with all of these container platforms, whether they are just a container runtime, a Kubernetes service, or a container registry. And I won't list all these out to you, but do note that, not only does every cloud platform have its container runtimes and Kubernetes platforms, we have ours as well, whether it's the Docker runtime that ships with SUSE Linux, the Rancher Kubernetes engine, or RKE, or K3S, the Kubernetes platforms that we sell, and the SUSE private registry for a container image registry. So we support all these with SUSE Manager, and how we do that is on the next slide. With SUSE Manager and containers, we have the ability to define what we call container image stores. These really are just Docker container registries. We can define image profiles, which really maps to a Docker file stored in GitHub or some other accessible web repository. We have the ability to build images from those Docker files, and then we have the and stick those images into a container registry. And then once those images are built, we have the ability to audit them for CVEs, just like we do running systems. So with all these different technologies, we have the ability to look at container images as another kind of system that you can audit and patch and rebuild and manage its entire lifecycle through SUSE Manager.
Many of you have asked about subscription matching. In other words, how do I align what I see that I've purchased from SUSE with what I see in my SUSE Manager server? And now the subscription matching feature of SUSE Manager, which you may or may not have familiarity with, has the ability to gather virtual instances from your cloud provider. So whether you're using Amazon EC2, Azure, or GCP, you can install the virtual host gatherer libcloud package on your SUSE Manager server. And then it can actually map your BYOS subscriptions, and that's really what we're trying to match here, is ones that you've purchased from SUSE, and align those with how I've laid things out in the cloud. So for example, if I have 4 SUSE Manager proxies, I can assign those or pin those subscriptions to my instances in the varying clouds in the regions where I'm using them. This is actively being improved upon for functionality, and the documentation here. There's a link on this page on how to tie that virtual host manager to Amazon as an example. So if that's something that's important to you, is matching subscriptions, this is not for any audit purposes. This is purely for you as a customer to have information on how I'm using my subscriptions. So what do you want next? I'm one of the people at SUSE who is trying to gather customer needs. I'm specifically assigned to North America, but you may be in another region. And some of these things are ones that people have asked about. Topology awareness, the ability to do cloud init awareness, for example, because uh, having some of the information that's in cloud init may not be visible in the SUSE Manager user interface. Provisioning from bare metal. So if you're using cloud provisioning already, that may be mitigated, but there are some instances where you need provisioning across a broader set of activities. And then, of course, Rancher and Kubernetes integration. Considering we just purchased a Rancher within the last year, there's a lot of that integration that's going on. And what do you really need to know? Do you need to be able to deploy a new system with K3S and have it automatically register that cluster back up to Rancher as an example. And then automating the onboarding. So does it matter to you if I start a new instance next week in Azure that somehow it automatically gets onboarded into SUSE Manager? Would that be nice? Or are there steps that we can take in any of these or other things? Please give us some feedback on what you'd like to see next.
Yeah, and of course, those are some ideas of what we think you might like to see, but you may have some other ideas that we have not put out there. So absolutely, let us know, and we'll see if we can get those into the product funnel.
Yes.
So we're going to wrap up with some pointers to some resources. First, of course, is the SUSE Manager documentation. There's not a specific section about public cloud, but you can do a search within the documentation and find all the relevant information. There's also a great blog post about SUSE Manager 4.1 and content management by Jason Phippen, and there's the URL for that. And finally, there's about a dozen other SUSE Manager sessions here at SUSECON Digital 21. There's things about, first of all, there's a roadmap session, which is always useful to see where we're going. There are sessions on getting more from Salt. There's sessions on integrating with Ansible. There's sessions on working with Rancher and K3S. So a whole bunch of great content. Spend some time looking through that. Obviously, if you're interested in SUSE Manager, this is your number one resource for the latest in what's happening in the SUSE world.
And with that, we'd like to thank you for attending our session. And please give feedback as much as you can through the conference portal tools, and enjoy your time at SUSECON Digital.
Thanks.